Hello and welcome to Prism Prints. I'm Ben, and in this video, I'll be going over all of the brushes in Shapelab Max 2026. First off, Shapelab has a wonderful tutorial series which I highly recommend checking out. The link is in the description below. I just wanted to make an overview from my perspective, especially since some new features have been added. Also, if you're interested in trying Shapelab out for yourself, stick around to the end for my 35% off promo code. Most of the brushes will have a few universal settings and brush shapes. There are also a few constraints and modes that will be good to know going in. On the left-hand side of the screen are the icons for the individual brushes. For the constraints and modes, I'll go over them a bit more in depth when we start going through the settings. I've also created kind of a constraints and modes cheat sheet that I will put up on the right side of the screen when I'm going over them so you can reference what they all do in relation to the individual brushes. Starting at the top right on most of your brush settings is the option to choose or even add an alpha for your brush. An alpha is essentially making it so you can add, subtract, or stamp specific details onto your model. I totally encourage playing around and having fun with the alphas, but I'll be keeping the default settings for this video. Directly to the left of that is the stroke mode selection. Normal will allow you to sculpt or paint by clicking and dragging across the model, similar to a paintbrush. If you want even more control, you can adjust the strength and resolution multipliers as well as the stroke spacing. Spray will give the brushes a spattered effect when interacting with the model, like spray paint. You can also control spray density and area of effect. Last is stamp, which is pretty self-explanatory. This will allow you to manipulate the model in just one area at a time. Clicking and dragging will let you drag the stamp effect across the model as a preview. Letting go of the trigger will set the stamp. This is great to use with different alphas. Now, under Settings, there are a few sliders that will be under most brushes. Strength is like how light or hard you are pressing the brush to the model. Increasing the number will increase the effect of the brush stroke. The Size-View-Based slider is the scale of the brush and can also be controlled with the right thumbstick. Fall-Off-Smooth is how soft or hard the brush is. A higher percentage will result in a soft brush stroke on the model. Lowering the percentage makes the brush edges harder, creating more defined ridges to the brush strokes. Resolution-Relative allows you to retopologize with the brush stroke. The polygon density can be increased or decreased with the slider and is relative to the brush size. I prefer to turn on the wireframe when using this setting. Steady stroke radius gives you more control with your brush strokes. With this setting turned on, the brush will trail behind your hand following a red line to show where the brush will be going. This allows for much cleaner results. These are all toggled on and off by selecting the box next to the corresponding slider. The next thing to look at are the brush shapes. Your brush is represented by this blue translucent sphere. This simply gives you the option to change the shape to a cube or a pill if you like. I typically use the sphere, but it really depends on the sculpt. For example, I like to use the Move brush with the cube brush shape when sculpting wood. It helps me keep things a little more rigid when building up the form. Now let's start going over the brushes themselves. The paintbrush is how you add color, texture, shine, and more to your model. First, open the PBR material settings by clicking the image at the top of the settings. This is where you can color pick and control metallic feel, roughness, and light emission. You have an eyedropper tool if you're looking to match a color specifically. Below that is a color box and slider. you also have the option to choose via hex input, as well as browse an assortment of presets. Going back to the paintbrush settings, the strength slider has been replaced with an opacity slider. The results, however, are the same. Raising the number on opacity is like pressing harder with the brush. Let's go over this first set of constraints and modes. Raycast will change your brush from being connected to your dominant hand to being a laser pointer. I like to keep this turned off, but I think it's just a preference thing. The next option is to snap the cursor or brush directly to the model. I found this to be helpful when working on very specific details on hard surface projects, however, the possibilities are endless. Next is the option to lock your brush perpendicular to the model. Again, I find this particularly helpful with high precision hard surface projects. Beside this is rotate along drag. Having this selected will rotate your brush according to your movements across the model. When it's unselected, the brush stays locked to the artist's hand movements. This is a more noticeable difference when using something other than a round brush shape. On the next row is Edit Front Faces Only. This will lock any brush manipulation to the front faces of the model that the brush is directly interacting with. A good example for this being needed is when sculpting something thin like a wing. This allows you to sculpt detail on one side of the wing without affecting the other side. The next constraint is Edit Connected Surfaces Only. This setting is more useful when dealing with multiple objects joined together. Having this selected will allow you to edit the mesh of one without affecting other areas that need to remain untouched. Last is Allow Buildup. This really matters if you are painting below 100% opacity. If unselected, the brush will only paint areas to the percentage on the opacity slider. If it is enabled, continuing to pass back and forth with the brush strokes will build up the opacity to 100%. The paint bucket is similar to the paint brush, but will paint the entire object instead of just where you drag the brush. Under fill mode, you have a threshold slider, which determines how close your brush needs to be to the object when painting to actually apply the fill. Under that, you can choose between continuous or global painting. Continuous lets you paint individual objects, as well as click and drag the paint onto multiple. Global painting will fill all of the selected objects. The masking brush gives you the ability to isolate specific areas on a model and keep them from being affected by modifications. There are a few more settings with this brush, so I'll go over each new section. Under masking mode, you can modify the brush to either add the mask to the model, erase the mask from the model, blur, or sharpen the mask. Also, when you start painting the mask on, it will turn the area black as a visual indicator. Next, under curvature constraint, you can choose to affect all areas with the mask brush, just the cavities, or just the bumps of the model. This is super handy when you need to mask very specific areas of a model that may be a little difficult to isolate. The contrast and detail sliders give you control over how much or little you are able to mask the cavities and bumps. It's worth playing around with these settings as it can be very specific to the project if you choose to use these constraints. Lastly, under Mask Actions, you can choose to either hide or show the mask, mask the entire model with fill, invert the masked area on the model, clear the mask selection, blur, sharpen, separate the masked area into its own object, and delete the masked area. Little side note, when you choose to either separate or delete the masked area, it will leave your model or models with a hole. One quick way to fix this is to open the context menu under Merge and Split and select Close Holes. The new constraint here is no buildup. This will make it so the intensity of the brush can only reach a certain level and not affect the model beyond that point. The stamp brush allows you to add or take away specific geometry of the selected object. This means if I stamp in a cube, that cube is part of the starting sphere, whether it's touching or not. Inverting the brush would simply subtract the cube from the sphere. You have the same options for refining the stamp shape as you do in scene mode when adding an object. There are two tabs, Parametric and Stamps. Parametric gives you access to 7 starting shapes which are highly modifiable. You can adjust scale on individual axes, add a hole, taper, and bevel round or squared off edges both horizontally and vertically. One thing to keep in mind though is the polygon density. Having a wildly different number of polygons between your object and the stamp may lead to weird connection or interaction points. Increasing the polygon density can result in a cleaner outcome, but this will add quite a bit more polygons. I feel like when messing with the slider, it's best to turn on the wireframe to really see how you are changing the geometry. A nice feature in these settings, and a few more to come, is the reset button for whenever you need to just go back to the default and start over. Looking under the Stamps tab, you have access to some really great starting models. From anatomy to creature parts to miniature bases, it's worth going through and checking them out. Some really fun stuff. You also have the ability to add a new custom stamp of your own, but that's a different video for the future. There are 2 new constraints here. First is Invert Brush Manipulation Direction. When enabled, the brush will turn red and affect the model opposite to how its default setting would. So instead of stamping cubes into the scene, I can now subtract cubes from the object in the scene. Next is Apply Material Settings from PBR Properties. This will simply let you toggle between the default object material and any other material you set in the PBR material settings. When you first open Shapelab, you will see a sphere and the standard brush will be selected. With the default settings, you start out with a nice, soft, round brush that allows you to smoothly build up your model. I think the simplicity of this brush is its strength. It gets used in every sculpt I make and makes sense as to why it's the standard. The clay brush works similarly to the standard brush. You'll notice the brush automatically has a square alpha selected. This will give a harsher edge to your brush strokes and give the appearance of layering on or carving away strips of clay. I think this is very useful for sketching out ideas. The rougher finish almost encourages a looser style, which is great for concepting, pose work, refining forms, and more. You also have one more setting for this brush. Height limit refers to the thickness of the clay. Lower numbers help with layering on details, while higher numbers let you really chunk it on. The Crease Brush is a newer addition to the list and comes with a couple extra settings: pinch strength and pinch radius. Pinch strength is how much the mesh gets pulled together when pushing in the crease. A higher number will create a deeper, more defined crease. Pinch radius is just how far the pinch effect is from the center of the brush. This brush is best used for things like wrinkles or fabric folds. The Inflate brush does exactly what it says. Wherever you use this brush on the model will inflate like a balloon. When inverted, it will deflate. It's important to keep an eye on the geometry with this brush though. You'll notice that if you just keep inflating a spot, sometimes the geometry will start intersecting with itself. It's an easy fix with the smooth brush, but best to be mindful. This is a great brush for adding details like bubbles or craters. I also like to use it for subtly adding or subtracting a little extra heft on certain areas. Speaking of the smooth brush, this is one of my most used brushes of the bunch. Like stated before with the Inflate brush, it can help to smooth out and align any intersecting or weird geometry, either giving you a cleaner model to work with or clearing up any issue that needs fixing. This is typically a brush I reach for later on in the process. After defining forms and working more on the details of a piece, naturally, there will be areas that pull the eye and may need to be muted a bit. This brush is quite useful in tandem with the clay brush as well. If I had to guess, the Move brush is probably my most used brush. I use it from the beginning all the way through to the end. I prefer to start my sculpts with basic shapes like spheres and cubes, then use the Move brush to start pushing and pulling them into the basic forms. At the bottom, under Constraints and Modes, you can choose between Default, Elastic, and Elastic Plus. Default will simply allow you to move the selected area of the geometry of a model without affecting any of the geometry around it. Elastic, which is what I primarily use, will slightly affect the surrounding geometry of the area being moved. This typically leads to a more natural shift as opposed to really squishing or stretching the geometry. Finally, Elastic Plus, in my opinion, is best used for large sweeping changes. Selecting one area of the model will greatly affect the surrounding geometry, and even the entire model. This is a great tool for reworking poses and experimenting with lines. It's also just a lot of fun to use. Something else I like to use this brush for is adding texture to a model. Selecting an alpha for the Move brush, then pushing and pulling those details into the model gives me a bit more control. The Tentacle Brush is a pretty specific brush and is a lot of fun to use. This gives you the ability to essentially pull tentacles from the selected object. The geometry will gather from the object following the path of the brush. I feel like it's best to have the Dynamic Resolution-Relative slider checked. This will add geometry as you create the tentacles. Otherwise, it will only work with the topology present. I'll admit, I don't use this brush too often. It can be a bit difficult to get the shape I want, but to each their own. The Trim brush allows you to carve a flat edge where the brush is dragged. I typically use this brush for beveling edges and filing down details. There are a few new constraints and modes with this brush. The new constraint here is Lock Plane upon edit. When enabled, this will lock your brush to the plane you started using the brush on. Very useful when trying to maintain a consistent level. Next are the three modes. Dynamic mode is your default and will probably be the most used. It simply trims a flat path away where you brush. Keep edges will allow you to trim up an area right next to an edge without affecting it. Create stairs lets you drag the brush over the model and create a flat stair where the brush stroke ends. The Flatten Brush will create a flat side to the selected object wherever the brush is located. So, if you use the brush on or in the object, it will lock to the plane where you first engaged the brush and flatten the area you paint to that plane. The pinch brush is great when you need to create a sharp point or really emphasize some ridges and valleys on a sculpt. At the bottom of the settings, you can choose between point or line mode. Point mode will pull the geometry of where you are brushing to a singular point. Line mode will allow you to drag the brush across the model to create or accentuate lines. This is a great brush to use with the Crease Brush as it will refine the edge for a cleaner finish. The Regularize Brush is dedicated to simply refining the geometry of the model. This brush will add or reduce the polygons of the brushed area without any other transformation of the model. I actually prefer to use this on areas I want to add more detail in first, then go in with whatever brush I need for the detail itself. I feel like I have more control as opposed to using the resolution relative slider on the individual brushes, but again, to each their own. I hope you found this overview helpful and feel inspired to make some art of your own. If you were looking to give Shapelab a try, you can use my promo code to save a total of 35% off when you purchase from their website or the Meta Store. This info is also in the description. Thank you so much for checking this video out. If you appreciate content like this and feel I deserve it, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Again, thank you, have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you on the next one.